Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the OTT.X Wednesday webinar series. On behalf of all of us at OTT.X, I want to thank you for joining us today to the series where we are once again delighted to bring you thoughtful, insightful, thought-provoking presentations across a broad spectrum of OTT-related topics from thought leaders across our industry. I think most everyone is aware that in recent years, the media industry has experienced and is experiencing still a huge amount of consolidation. Some might call it a merger mania, with Viacom and CBS, Amazon and MGM, Warner Media, and Discovery, Disney, and Fox, to name but a few. So the question is, what does this mean for the rest of us, and how can we win in an industry going through such vast consolidation? Today, we're fortunate to have with us someone who can help us answer that question, with an extensive look at this evolving landscape and how to find opportunities in the change and position our company for success in the future. Tom McDonough is Director of Media Client Services at Vistex. He has over 22 years of experience in media and serves as an industry expert for Vistex. He's spent several years in studio finance and maintains a deep understanding of media rights, royalties, and finance, leveraging his experience to provide efficient and scalable solutions that address the ever-evolving challenges facing the media industry today. Before we get started, I also want to thank Vistex for participating in our webinar today and for their ongoing support of OTT.X. I know we're all looking forward to Tom's presentation, Winning Through Media Consolidation. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tom to get things started. Tom, welcome.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you very much. And thank you for everybody attending. Let me just get the screen share going and then we can begin. Let's see now, do we have, sorry, let me just get that. And okay, are we okay for sharing the screen? Can you see everything okay, Eric?
That's fantastic. All right, take it away.
All right, great. All right, so, well, thanks everybody again. What we're gonna talk about today, the topic I came up with on was, like Eric said, winning through media consolidation. And it's really about the mergers that have been going on recently in the news. And here at Vistex, we offer software that does manages contract, rights, and royalties. So I'm going to kind of look at this from the perspective of what how we see things, and mostly it's from the perspective of the back office. So what we're going to look through today, for the today's agenda, we'll talk about merger mania. Why? Why is this happening? Just some thoughts on that. I think a lot of people have seen and read the news, and we're all in the industry, so we have our own thoughts about that. But I'll just touch on a couple things from my perspective on this. And then recent mergers, like who's been doing this? Eric had kind of teed it up a little bit, so we'll just refresh on that slightly. And then we'll get into, what is the impact, from the business standpoint? What's the business impact? How do we see that? And then what are the technical challenges to address that impact? And then, how do you move forward? So that's the agenda. So we'll take it in a turn. So first and foremost, why? Why is this happening? And I'm going to look at this from the perspective of content consumption. At one point it was called watching TV. Now it's content consumption is the vernacular of the day. But really, like, where are we viewing our content, and the fact that that has now shifted into the direct into the home from the theater. So I think that's a big avenue to discuss why these mergers are taking place. The trend was certainly underway prior to 2020. With the advent of streaming that's coming along since 2006-07, it's been building and building and building. But obviously COVID, with everybody having to stay at home, has turbocharged that quite a bit. In 2019, you had 642 million SVOD subscribers. By 2020, you had 1.1 billion. That's nearly double in 12 months, which is astounding. And the projection isn't going back down again. It's trending upwards. So we're looking at potentially 1.6 billion subscribers by 2025. So that's a major shift in how people are, consuming the media content that we have in our industry. and some of the reasons, from my perspective, I think a lot of this also has to do with the technology shift. Besides the fact that we're sitting in living rooms because of COVID, you've got the fact that you can put a video file over a streaming airwave really became practical around 2006, 2007, around that space of time. Earlier, about the 2001, 2s, it was all about music, Napster, then later Spotify's and those streaming music. That's because those files are so much smaller. Now, with the big motion pictures, it just took like an hour to download. It wasn't really practical. That improved quite a bit. And by that time, streaming, Netflix, I think, always had this in mind, like that was their strategy. So that was more prevalent towards 2010. I think that also what went hand in hand with that was the fact that your home theater experience was much more affordable. You went from the CRT television sets that were, in order to get a big screen in your living room, it was this huge 500-pound gorilla that took up half of the room. So you really didn't have that, anything that could come close to replicating a theater experience. When you see plasma TVs, flat panels, then later LCDs, and now the technology is everywhere, you can basically dedicate a wall to your house to getting that and achieving that. And that really starts to compete a little bit more with the experience you get in the movie theaters. I'll go with that, the surround sound capabilities that are, back in the 90s, getting something like that in your house would cost $20,000 north of that. Now a couple of grand will get you that level of technology. And that's, it's so much more affordable, which means it's so much more pervasive. It's in every household. So you're really getting a shift that way. It doesn't take place of the whole audience experience, obviously. But it does, those home theaters are amazing now. So that's another reason why you're getting more people, even before COVID, spending time and investing in subscriptions. Okay, so when you get more people demanding and absorbing this content, then the people supplying the food chain, if you will, need to provide more. So, when you start binging through season after season, you're able to knock out, 5 seasons of a show in a matter of weeks, sometimes even shorter than that. So these services start running out of fresh content to supply. And when they start running out of fresh content to supply, you get people jumping from one to the next. So we call churn. I think there was a report just the week before last that there was like a 30% churn rate in 2021, which is an extremely high number. So what you have is, you'll sign up for a Hulu and you'll burn through the shows that you're interested in, and then you'll shut off that service and jump over to the next one. So that's great for a consumer, but it's not so great for the suppliers. And so what they want to do is make it more compelling for you to stick with them, like what we're seeing with Netflix. So everyone's kind of chasing the Netflix vehicle, and we'll touch on that in a little shortly. So how do you compete with that? You got to have a big, deep library to draw attention and to keep attention. Okay, so let's go on to the next slide. Okay, so who's been doing this? So we talked a little bit about why this is happening, who's been taking place. Erica touched on, so you got Amazon and MGM, Disney and Fox, Viacom, CBS, and AT&T and Warner. So those are the ones I'm going to talk about today. There's probably some smaller variations to this, but these are kind of the big players that have been in the news. And I'll just add some just real quick thoughts, because this is everybody's kind of been exposed to this information already. With Amazon and MGM, you got the Amazon Prime, a retail delivery company originally, developed their own content, mostly newer, fresher content. They license content as well. And then they buy this massive film library from a legacy studio with dozens and hundreds and hundreds of titles. So now suddenly you've got a library that you have classics in addition to what you've already got. So obviously makes quite a bit of sense for them to put them into that platform where they've got a lot of options and a compelling reason to be with them. Disney Fox. Disney is the biggest studio of them all right now. They've been growing quite a bit. They took on Lucasfilm, Marvel, Pixar. Now they're taking Fox. My only thought to that is adding Fox allows the Disney family brand label to maintain, and then they've got Fox, so they can get a little more of the edgy content through that umbrella. But other than that, they're just, again, just building up as much library as they can to compete. Viacom and CBS, they're kind of like the Taylor Burton, Liz Taylor, Richard Burton of the studios. They were together, then they're apart. Now they're getting back together again. You've got CBS, again, legacy broadcast company that has a lot of television and motion picture and other content available, merging with Viacom that has the Paramount library, all feeding Paramount Plus, the service that's designed to compete again with the big players. So there you go with that. AT&T Warner, around 2015, they bought Warner, they bought DirecTV as the delivery vehicle. The whole plan was for this telecom company to jump into this main stage with everybody else. It didn't quite work out the way that they were originally intending. I think some of that has to do, honestly, with the culture of AT&T. That they're a telecom company, they were a media company, and there's a little bit of difficulty getting all of that aligned in the same direction. So they've recently divested, and now you've got Warner and Discovery merging together, and that's just as of late brought about some antitrust concerns. So we'll see where that ends up. Okay, so those are the main players. Let's move on to the next slide. So how does this impact the back office? So from what we see, so what are we seeing on this as a result of these things happening? And I broke it down into some pretty simplified bullet points here. Redundancies are probably going to be the first thing that comes to mind. When you've got two studios merging together, like a Disney and a Fox, you're going to have a lot of overlap with departments and systems and personnel and methodologies. All of that's going to be there's a lot of overlap there. Not so much when you're talking about a telecom company buying a media company. There's a little bit of less so. So that's one of the big things that you need to consider when these things happen. Is there, some of these studios have dozens of systems that need to get reevaluated when this happens. Next one is business process. So along with the systems and the staff, there's how we do things. What is the procedures that we do to take a contract through its workflow? How do we process royalties, both inbound and some back-end royalties, potentially even with studios that develop their own content? So what are how do we send out our avails? How do we, how are all these things done? These are all business process questions that come along with these mergers, and they can, even though they're, you got two studios that do the same business model, from what we've seen, when you go from one to the next, and you see a lot of different approaches about how they do that. And then the final bullet point I had on here was new content discovery. Now this might be a little bit more in the fringe, but it's also worth pointing out. So what you have is when these things happen, there's a lot of introspection that goes on. You start looking at the deals that you've done. You've got new content coming in. You find new ways to repackage existing delivery methods, like, oh, I've got a new genre of titles. How do I incorporate that into my existing deals? I've got, there's a whole way of doing business that we didn't do, and now we're seeing that and realizing, oh, maybe we can make some amendments and changes to what the contracts that we have in play now. So, some of that sort of comes to the surface as part of these large mergers. So, so with that, we'll move over to the technical challenges. Before I get into this, are there any questions so far? I'll open it up. I'll keep it, more. I want it to be more conversational if possible. So if you have any, feel free.
Why don't we do that? So if you have any thoughts or questions you want to bring up with Tom, by all means, do drop them into the Q&A bin. We'll keep an eye out there for questions from y'all. Yeah, I have some questions myself. Actually, you brought up some interesting, obviously some of the mergers that have taken place over the last year or two. Do you see any mergers on the horizon? Anything that might be something?
I do. I have. That's you're jumping ahead. I've got some final thoughts for that at the end, but I will.
Well, I don't want to spoil that.
Yeah, we don't. That's a spoiler alert, so we don't want to. We want to be doing that. I will get to that. But yeah, I have some thoughts on it. I don't see anything specifically.
Apple and NBC, or Apple and Comcast, maybe. Right?
Yes, Apple and Comcast is an interesting one. There has been some chatter about that. I think that is interesting. Apple's the one big player. They could pretty much buy whoever they want. We'll see what happens there.
Yeah.
That is one that's
it's interesting when you have a merger versus kind of an acquisition. My former life, I worked at Microsoft, and we did some acquisitions, and it always seemed like we'd acquire a company for their technology, for their IP. And many of the factors that you bring up, I guess that's maybe like if you're a content company, you acquire a company for content. We're a technology company, so we're acquiring them, a company for their technology. But many of the factors that you brought up about the policies, the culture in an organization, they really do make a difference in whether or not that combination, whether it's an acquisition or a merger, is going to be successful. And gosh, I really do feel like there were so many great companies and technologies that we just found a way to kind of screw up by acquiring them, and they were just fine without us. But I don't know. What are some examples of the kinds of policies or cultural differences that
well, yeah. So culturally, that's a real gray area. It's one thing to kind of know, what the library is and what they have, and okay, these are the things we want, and that's more, concrete. The X factor is personality and political, and we'll kind of touch on that a little bit. But that's definitely one of our challenges. Where you have to get buy-in from, when you get companies, either one acquiring the other or companies merging, a lot of it has to do with, is everybody on the same wavelength? There's a lot of change going on. People are resistant to change. Getting everyone pointed in the right direction is usually the number one priority of senior management. And then with the hope that travels down through the ranks to everybody, and everybody is on board. So that's definitely one. As far as policies go, just in things that don't necessarily get thought through at the time or initially, things like, do we recognize revenue based on the same policy? If we have different kinds of content, does that undergo the same rev rec policy as motion pictures, as with TV, as with music and others? And I'll stay on the finance side. So you've got, foreign exchange. Do we handle that the same way? Do we reevaluate or do we not? One business does, one business doesn't. How does that impact downstream reporting when we want to report all this together? Those kinds of things. You can get into the approach to billing and how we write these contracts. So there's so much to, the policies that are in play with business A and those that are in business B, and are those in alignment, and if they're not, and generally they're not, then what do we do about that? So there's a lot of conversation that goes on with projects that deal with addressing those kinds of concerns, interfacing. reporting, data lakes, that kind of thing. How to get all of that pointed in the right direction.
Yeah,
So those are
there's an awful lot to it. When you start digging into it, like everything, it's in these kind of business arrangements, the easy part is like kind of getting the deal done and figuring out what the business benefit to both entities is. And yeah, we feel really good about this, but then, gosh, y'all are on SAP and we're on Oracle or something. And well, we'll just, interface those. The tech people will figure that out.
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
Like on the technical side, this is a question from Bill Woods. Thanks, Bill. What are some of the critical success factors for merging entities when you're talking about optimizing back office systems, like SAP, and are there things that you recommend or suggest when it comes to content libraries and identifying them? IDER is something that my plug for our friends at IDER.
Yeah, no, that's exactly that. Critical success items for those kinds of things are exactly getting, I think, number one from the back office side is getting the data aligned. One of the biggest challenges, and I'm going to touch on it really on this slide, is how is that data stored with each of the two companies? What are the conventions for coding? What are the conventions for the hierarchies of the master tables? Where's the sources for all that? So really, it's the backbone of all of the contract management are those source tables, and identifying them and figuring out what is going to be the most efficient solution forward are the critical things to look at. There are nuances that you're going to do, the layouts of reports and invoices and that kind of thing. That's not as, I would say that's a secondary as far as getting the core. So if you look at the core of any system that manages this stuff, it's the master tables, right? When you go into an implementation, if it's not a company merging, those are the first things you need to address. So getting all of that under the same convention is the number one thing that you need to look to for optimal success.
And that's no easy task. This is how one of the ways that studios end up with 7 different numbering or ID conventions within their.
Well, and going with that is you've got coding conventions themselves, and speaking from a former user, what a lot of people don't think about, or people weren't using systems, the people that especially work on day-to-day tend to get used to those codes. And you actually start searching on things through your system just by typing in the codes more so than the names, especially with media content where, you've got international names for titles, you've got, US names for titles, different spellings and different things like that. One thing that's always unique are the codes. And so as an accountant, you start, I almost hate to say it, but you start memorizing those things and you start getting used to that. So if your company has a structure that says, okay, all of the TV product is going to be prefixed with alpha and all of the film product is going to be numeric, then the minute you see an alpha in a code, you immediately know it's a TV product. Mm-hmm. Those conventions that are in one organization may not be the same in the second organization. So getting used to that and getting the users used to seeing that new stuff, again, change is difficult, but you have to think about those kinds of things.
That's a great point. I mean, those things influence processes and the way things are getting done and the efficiency that you have in doing any task or process, and they're baked into it. And all of a sudden those things change, and you have to reinvent the process.
You have to reinvent it, and how fast you're able to do your job on a day-to-day. You're used to just banging out those codes and things, and suddenly that gets disrupted. You're not as efficient as you were, and it takes a little while to catch back up to that.
Yeah, it makes you wonder how things are going. Fox and Disney, they're going fine. Everything's going great, guys.
Well, they'll figure it out, as they say.
I'm sure they will. All right. Well, with that, I turn it back over to you, Tom, to carry on the presentation. It's been great.
All right. Sure. All right. So just looking at this slide, and then we did touch on a little bit about that. Multiple process specific systems to evaluate. So what do we mean by that? The way systems roll into companies is piecemeal. generally speaking, back when we're starting a business, we're all going to look at this comprehensively. That really doesn't have. These studios are, been around since the 20s and 30s. Some of them, they've gone through different systems at different times. Typically, what happens with studios is a department or a division has a budget to satisfy a specific need, and they buy or they install a system to deal with that one thing, one process. And when I say systems, this can be an actual, database, or it can be spreadsheets. It can be an access database that one of the people in the department wrote for that department. It can be, notes pinned to the cubicle wall. We see all of that. So what you have is these things rolling out at different times for specific purposes. They aren't necessarily always thought to work together. So some of these larger companies can have, I think at one point Fox had 65 different systems that their IT department had to evaluate and figure out, what do all these things do, and are they overlapping, and which is the best one to move forward with. So now you take two companies like Fox. Now, what do you have? 130? I mean, who knows? But even if you've got 20, that's too many. So specifically engineered solutions. And the other thing that you have with this overlap is getting, like we touched on in the conversation, is stakeholder buy-in. It's more of the human side of it. It's a bit of a challenge to get people to go along with this change. We're all going to go this direction. It's tricky in a non-merge world, but when you get into the merge world, it gets even more so. So that's on the system side. And then, as I mentioned earlier, aligning the data is number two. Once you've got your systems kind of figured out, or you're starting to get a feel for how you're going to go, the data structures, the master tables, we talked about that a second ago, but the groupings, is the territory, what is the Middle East in this territory tree versus that, that's all subjective to the style of business and where that company's done business. Things like the rights table. If you've got a company that predominantly does home video, they're not going to have a deep tree as far as digital, potentially. Those kinds of things need to be reevaluated and taken. What's going to be the most efficient rights table moving forward? So all of those conventions, as well on the coding. Coding isn't just for the titles; it's also for all of the different. Every object within a database has a unique code, so you have to get all of that into alignment. I've got one for architectural differences. When you've got different systems being developed by different companies throughout the years, some may combine certain bits of master data. So the territory is combined with the language table in one system. There are two different tables in another system. How do you get that data to play nice with the system moving forward? How do you extract those values so that they line up with the new approach? Those are challenges that we see. And then interfaces. We could do a whole segment on just interfaces. They're interfacing from system to system, interfacing from systems to data lakes and reporting tools with the general ledger or the ERP. All of those things need to be, there's a lot of moving parts with those. And I would just say with interfaces, rule of thumb is less is more. Next slide is on business process. So merging workflows. Again, this started to drift a little more into the human side of things, where you're trying to align how we're going to do things. I can't tell you how many times we hear, clients, users come to us and say, well, we do it that way because that's the way the system requires it. Sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes systems are designed to be efficient and they sort of steer the business into the best practices. But sometimes if they're older systems, they may not have been designed to cope with the modern way that we're selling, and they've been tweaked to accommodate it, and maybe not as efficiently as a more modern system. So you do have to kind of cope with that, breaking away from doing it this way because that's how we've had to do it in the past. So the other part to that, even though it's not efficient, and your client understands that, it can be tricky to get away from it because you're used to it, and that's pretty universal. I've undergone that myself, moving from one process to another just to accommodate a new system. But ultimately, that proves out to be more efficient, and you're able to do make more efficiency and more efficient use of your time. And then one other thing about the workflow, just to one of the challenges is aligning rights and accounting. It's pretty standard, I'll have to say, is getting the people that there's two, it starts to boil out to two distinct groups. You've got the contract people, and then you've got the accountants. And the funny part is the contract has both components, but within the studio structure, these are different departments, and so they all have to kind of work together to facilitate a contract. And getting those groups to agree, sometimes that goes back to just the structure of the rights table itself. We sell things at a more granular level of rights from a rights management perspective than we do on the accounting side. Accounting is, we tend to roll that information up because it's just too much to try to break a number down into all the permutations of the rights that you're selling into. So generally what you see is if you're selling into even multiple territories, there's a designated representative territory for that revenue, depending from business to business, it depends, or even down to the rights themselves. So those are some of the challenges we see on the business side. Okay, so we've got our challenges. How do we move forward? First and foremost, I think it's like DIY. Okay, the most expensive words in DIY are "while we're at it," but when you've got these companies converging, now's the time to take a step back and take a look at the whole operation and decide, how we're gonna, what's going to be the most efficient avenue to move forward. How is this going to, what's the end game? We talked about, reviewing dozens of systems, trying to make things efficient, trying to converge two overlapping redundancies in both staffing and personnel and systems. What's the best way to move forward? When you're evaluating this, you don't necessarily have to think of replacing everything all at once. That would not be a recommended approach in any situation. But what you want to do is think about, what can be what does the end game look like? What you typically want to do is start looking at what are the systems that are really inefficient now? What really needs attention? And when we go in to replace that, can we scale that replacement into handling other aspects of the business down the road? Because you can't take it all on at once. But what you can do is take on a vision at once and then move that vision forward. So that's something that, at Vistex, that's kind of our perspective on how we approach this. The other is, I said a second ago about legacy systems and having those integrate. It's very risky to try to keep all of that afloat. I've heard it time and again in different projects, the difficulties of maintaining more and more integration from system to system. There's a lot of breakpoints with that, and the minute one fails, then the downstream impact is severe, and it's just a lot of resources and manpower to keep all of those balls afloat. So that's a risky approach. The next point I have on this is like handling in-flight deals. Okay, so we're going to have these businesses converging. Do we have architecture that allows us to support two different deal structures, or even company policies. If you've got, we do amortization in this for costs, and this one we haven't. Do we have, if we're wanting to combine, we have the same licensee, and ultimately we want to do an amendment, maybe we bring those deals together, or we bring library content from one system, one company into our new contract or our existing contract. How do we do that? You want to have the flexibility to accommodate different policies all under existing contracts. And then the third point, I call it flex to scale. Flexibility is really just the key to scalability. So the more flexible your existing system is, the more it can take on. And it shouldn't come at a cost. The cost, you've got legacy systems. You can do anything with these things if you got enough money, but you don't want to have to spend a lot of change requests, a lot of time changing an older legacy system to accommodate the business moving forward. You need something that has the architecture to inherently change with the times. And this is an industry that is constantly in change. So that's that's kind of the way I see, the key aspects to moving forward. At Vistex, we not only look at things from the perspective of the media industry, but what's been trending lately is the convergence of all of the main aspects of media rights and royalties, which is media, music, consumer products. All of those are there's language to those, all three of those under the same contract. From our philosophy, there's no reason why that can't be managed by the same system, and in some cases under the same contract within that system. So that's kind of where we see the solve to some of the things that I had brought up earlier. And we kind of call that cross-segment reporting or cross-segment contract management, where we're actually able to handle all these different industry aspects under a single roof, and it just makes it more efficient. It centralizes your reporting. You're not relying on integration and those kinds of things. So that's kind of the direction we see, the important direction to move forward with. Okay, any other questions, and then I can get into final thoughts.
Yeah, once again, encourage those attending to drop your questions into the Q&A bin or the chat. Interesting, your discussion of stakeholder buy-in, and I'm wondering, like, if you have some ideas, maybe detail that a little bit. What does it take, in your experience? Like, what are some things that you can do to get stakeholder buy-in and get people on the same page? Just have a giant party and just.
Yeah, I was going to say vodka. Vodka usually does it. You get in the room, you pour a little in the coffee pot, and everybody relaxes. It's very nice. Yeah, no, it's funny. It is sort of you have to gain trust. You have to gain trust that what you're going to embark on, there's going to be change, and the trust that everybody's concerns are heard, and that you provide an avenue where those concerns are addressed and a more efficient structure is put in place to move forward. I think that's one of the things that you have to think about and be sensitive to, especially in the early stages of discussions on how you're going to move forward, is to get all of those thoughts and concerns on the table, and to get everybody to welcome the change moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, you're not just getting folks to buy into the idea of okay, we're going to combine these entities. You kind of need people to be to buy into the idea that, and to be open to a new way of doing things, and be open to, we may not have the best way of doing, it's really, once you're doing something a certain way for a while, you kind of feel like, well, it's a good way to do it, and they can do it our way.
Yeah.
need people to be open to that. Maybe it's not the best way.
Well, that's the thing. And then, and like I say, if you're used to it, like, well, I'm used to doing it this way, I can do it this way really easily. And then there's the concern of, I don't know what you proposed me to do. I'm not sure if it'll work. There's that kind of thing. So there's the fear of the unknown with the new direction. And that's pretty normal for most people. So you do kind of have to paint the picture as well, is like, I see how you're doing it this way, and if you can really sort of set that stage of like, this is how I could see it moving forward, and provide a vision that people can relate to as a day-to-day worker in these systems and things. That really helps. It really does help.
Yeah, I mean, it probably goes the other way as well, right? I mean, whoever is managing and kind of driving and leading the process and project for a merger or a combination, I think it's important to listen, and understand. Maybe some of these folks, have some good ideas about, the way that they're doing it now, and we should pay attention to that as well.
Yeah.
Each other probably in these situations. Okay. Well, with that, I would turn it back over to you to finish things up for us, Tom. Thanks a lot.
Okay, sure. All right, so just some final thoughts. Where's Netflix on this? So I hadn't really mentioned much about Netflix because they haven't really been indicating any interest in merging with anybody. They've got a deep set of license contracts. They got a lot of content. They're really active in producing their own product. So they're just doing fine. What they are doing is they're starting to get into the game world a little bit. So that's an avenue that goes to my next. What will be the next big merge? We talked about it a little earlier. My thinking on the next big merge isn't necessarily media company to media company. I think it's going to be media company to the game industry. That convergence, I see that happening a little more so, especially where you've got the AI, the way that media is produced. It's been, if you think about it, it's been produced the same way for over 100 years. You've got the ability to have interactive participation with this. And I think that's the next avenue where the entire platform is going to shift a little bit from watching, effectively the two-dimensional, and really being an interactive player with this. So, you see Netflix getting into this. Netflix has been, the pioneer in a lot of this stuff. So they're starting to steer this direction. Everybody else should probably take note. Where is all this going? Again, as it's get the magic 8-ball out. It's hard to say, but I think, historically you had a few studios controlling the entire supply chain, and then that got kind of broken apart. And then you had all these different players. Now it's almost coming back again. So if you think about the supply chain being the feed into the living room, you're getting smaller and smaller, larger companies, numbers of larger companies doing that, just like they did back in the 20s. Is that going to then break apart again? Perhaps. I think quite possibly. But that would be my guess. But it's anybody's guess. So that's where I will leave you. So that's basically what I have. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tom. I have one final question for you, and by all means, those attending, if you have some questions, we'd love to hear from you too. You think of these two companies and two entities that are either merging or maybe one's being acquired. What are the success factors for, like, why would you do this? When is it that two companies, or that one company is better than two, the sum of their parts? when does it make sense to do this, and when maybe it doesn't?
Well, I think if you look at it just from a real basic perspective, it's two things. It's A, making your platform bigger and more desirable, and therefore you're the go-to, you're the Netflix. And B, you're buying the competition, right? So you're minimizing your competitor by buying them, and now they're you. So just from a really high level perspective, that's what you've got. But within a larger organization, whether they then branch into different different divisions, and then you've got your own branding around that, that's fine. But I think those are probably the two, from a high level perspective. And like say, it's all about right now. It's all about having the most variety. If you're going to compete with Netflix, everybody's, that's really it. The more variety is going to win out at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's interesting in the case of content. I mean, having a lot of it is important, but also being able to create it on an ongoing, because the library is the library, but what people are watching most is new content.
Yeah.
And so if you acquire another studio or another library, even if you're a small entity, you acquire a small, some amount of inventory, at some point, that's not going to have as much value for you anymore. And so, is there something else that you can gain from that business combination, their processes, the way that they do deals, their brand? Is there, what else is there?
Yeah.
The creative process, is there leadership? Like, those are things to think about. Hopefully people are thinking about it.
Yeah, you're buying industry knowledge. I mean, you've got companies that obviously we're seeing now tech companies are taking over, and they're buying production houses when they're buying these studios. They're buying the ability to create things, the artistic personnel, the creative side of all of that. That's another aspect to this that comes along with an acquisition of a studio, is the whole production teams. A lot of it is, of course, over the last 50 years has gone more to independent production houses, but still, that's not to say that these studios don't still have a lot of creative talent that come aboard. And so that's a definitely another area.
Yeah, talk about different cultures.
Yeah.
Technology and studios.
Yeah, the two different cultures within the same studio.
Yeah, that's true too. All right. Well, we have a question here from Robert Ward. I'd like to pass along to you. Thank you, Robert. If gaming and streaming happens in the future merger, will we see a choose your own adventure type of content, where the audience gets to make decisions for the story? That's an interesting. We're seeing a little.
I think, I think there's already things like that, but yeah, I think I could definitely see that happening. The confluence of either a scripted backdrop to a reality style interactive experience would be my thinking, my guess on how that might initially transpire. But yeah, I think you do. You have some of those shows and things where the audience votes on how the show is going to end, that kind of a thing, where it's pre-produced. I could definitely see creatively blending that together with the interactive approach that you have with the headsets and all of the augmented reality. And what did Facebook just change their name to Metaverse? So it's all about that. That's a massive. That's the next big shift, isn't it? So
yeah, there's a lot of experimentation. I'm sure that we're going to get a chance to see. Some things will work, some things won't, and we get to be a part of it. It's a great time to be in this industry.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. With that, I want to thank Tom McDonough and Vistex for such a valuable, thought-provoking presentation today. And thanks to all of you for attending this edition of the OTT.X Wednesday webinar series. As always, session was recorded and it's going to be available on the OTT.X website at OTT.X.org, along with a bunch of other content from our previous presentations and conferences. Speaking of that, I want to also mention that on-demand access is now available to the OTT.X Pipeline Conference program from last week. So those of you who were there or were unable to be there, go back and relive your favorite portions of the conference or experience them for the first time. It's free for all OTT.X members and conference attendees. $40 for those that are non-members. Also want to remind everyone about some exciting events coming up on the OTT.X calendar. First off, in January, we'll be taking the OTT.X show on the road, returning after a long hiatus to CES in fabulous Las Vegas. It's going to be great to be back again for our customary CES breakfast session. It's a great way to fuel up before a busy day of meetings and CESing, or perhaps refuel after a night of hijinks whilst cavorting downtown, as some of us are wont to do. Working on a great slate of webinars as well to get the year kicked off with. Stay tuned for more details on that. And if you're interested in participating yourself or your company, do reach out to us. Let us know. We'd love to add you to our schedule for 2022. On February 17th, the OTT.X roundtable discussion sessions are going to be returning to Los Angeles. It's a great opportunity to connect with colleagues across the OTT.X ecosystem. We were just in New York for a similar session. We had a great time, had a great turnout, and some really great ideas shared and problems solved in the world of over-the-top video. Finally, on March 3rd, we're going to be hosting our first in-person Leadership Development Foundation Summit at the Skirball in LA. The event is for professionals in our industry seeking to grow as leaders and advance their careers. We're still looking for presenters and panelists for the summit, so please consider supporting the events and those developing their careers with your industry experience and leadership savvy. You can find out more about all of these events and programs at the OTT.X website at OTT.X.org. Do jump over there now at OTT.X.org. That concludes our webinar for today. Thanks for joining us and have a great rest of your day and a very happy holidays, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Tom.
Yep. Bye-bye.